This evening I'd like for us to study one of the most quoted and certainly most familiar sections in Scripture, and that is Psalm 23. You'd like to be turning there, please. Psalm 23. I want to study this especially so that we can focus on one line within that psalm, and that is the statement, I shall not want. So let's start by reading the psalm together. This time I'll be reading from the English Standard Version. From time to time throughout the lesson I'm going to quote a few other versions. And I like what they do with some of the lines. But we'll start here. Psalm 23, verse 1. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So that psalm centers on a vivid picture of something that was very familiar to the people who lived at the time it was written. Of course, that is the relationship between a shepherd and sheep. And that vivid analogy, as it is employed in Psalm 23, portrays for us a very simple but strong relationship of the sheep trusting and following the shepherd, and the shepherd, in a very loving and faithful way, caring for the needs of the sheep. But I'm sure you noticed the relationship described here goes beyond that particular analogy of shepherd and sheep. There are many shepherd and sheep things mentioned here. You have the sheep needing to be led to green pastures, needing to be led to waters, being easily spooked by waters that move quickly. You have the concept of sheep that are prone to injury and infection, and the shepherd would put oil on them. Sometimes sheep, because of a lack of water or because they're just simply timid, shepherds will take up a small lamb in their arms and give it a cup of water to nourish it by hand. So all those things are very real shepherd and sheep things. But he also talks about his soul being restored. He talks about the Lord acting for the sake of his own great name. He talks about a bountiful table prepared in the presence of his enemies. About the Lord's goodnesses and mercies being with him always as he dwells in the house of the Lord. So, of course, David is talking about much more than just the picture of a sheep and its shepherd. He's trying to capture the relationship of God and his people. So a shepherd and a sheep. In the Old Testament, the sheep is, of course, Israel. The shepherd is God. In the New Testament itself, the shepherd is most often Jesus, and the sheep are his disciples. New Israel. Which is why Jesus in John 10 describes himself as the good shepherd. And when he does that, given what the Old Testament has to say about God's relationship as the shepherd of Israel, when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, that's of course a claim to deity, of being the Lord. So with God, and now with God through his Son, we can have that trusting, caring relationship of sheep and shepherd. But what about a relationship so fitting that we can actually say, I shall not want? I shall not want. That's what it says in verse 1. I think that's how the English Standard, I think King James and New King James all put it. I like the way the Christian Standard Bible puts it, formerly known as the Holman Christian Standard Bible. The Lord is my shepherd. I have what I need. I have what I need. This is a relationship that brings about contentment, a relationship that fulfills us completely, providing all that the sheep needs. That kind of fulfillment from a relationship, that kind of complete contentment, everything that I need, is something that seems sometimes impossible. And not just to people who are outside of the Lord, you'd expect that, but we can read about this, we can talk about this, sing about it, have artwork in our houses that quote Psalm 23. How do I get to the point that the Lord is truly all that I need? And as long as I have Him, despite whatever else may be lacking, I'm not lacking. How do I get to that point? First of all, may I submit to you, it requires that we recalculate our values. So question, what is really important to me? What are my top priorities? Is it health, family, friends, work and the money it provides, hobbies, the various different things that I enjoy, some assortment of stuff? There's not necessarily in and of itself anything wrong with a lot of those things. A lot of those are very good. But if they come first, if anything created supplants the Creator, then it acts like a bucket with holes in it. Inasmuch as you can keep putting your energies into that bucket, pour all of your worth and effort into that, and it will never fill up, and it will just keep running out. On the other hand, if we seek the Lord and His righteousness, well, that's a bucket that's solid through and through. And you can pour your heart into that bucket, all your efforts into that bucket, and it will not be for nothing. God is that sealed bucket. Everything else in this life that satisfies in any kind of way has an expiration date. It has a fading value. But God, on the other hand, only increases in value the more you come to know Him and the more you devote to Him. Which tells us if there is anything in our life whatsoever that's more important than God, I will never be fully secured. I will never be filled up. So sometimes the Lord is not enough to us, but it's because of what we value instead. And that's not necessarily to say that we value sinful things over God. It's just that we value anything else over God. So if there's anything else that we value more than Him, and that's what we seek, and that's what we serve, I'm never going to be satisfied. Now we could just move on to point number 2. But I want you to think about that first question. What is truly important to you? What if you lost your health? I know some of you can say, I know what that's like. Every day you're in pain or weak or sick, and it's just that way constantly. What if you lost your job? Again, maybe some of you can say, I know what that's like. Completely blindsided, no fault of your own. Company's choosing to move in a different direction, and you're left behind. What if you lost your house? Maybe you know what that one's like. What if something happened and suddenly your debt was immense? I don't know what any of you may have gone through in when the housing market burst, when 07, 08, something like that. I was just out of college, and I had no savings, so that couldn't affect me. But I know many were drastically affected. And all of a sudden, lifestyle has to change. Some lost their homes, most of their money. What if you lost your mate? And again, some of you know what that's like. What if you lost your children? I don't know the story for everyone here. I hope none of you know what that's like, but maybe you do. I know for me, that's a hypothetical that I don't even really like to think about. Even right now talking about it, I'm not allowing myself to think about it. So hypotheticals about health and home and jobs, well, I don't want that to come true, but that's different to consider that. But to think about losing your child is just somewhere most parents do not want to go. And you can only go so far thinking about that, and then you just have to stop. And understanding that feeling as every parent can, then let me ask you this question. What if you lost the Lord? What if you lost the Lord? Ironically, isn't that a little bit easier to consider? To think about that hypothetical? I don't want to do it. But I can get sick to my stomach thinking about losing my children. Maybe not feel that severe. When I think about losing the Lord, I don't intend to, I don't want to, but it doesn't hit the same way. Shouldn't it? So thinking about some of those hypotheticals, that they are major hazards on the road, the home, the job, things like that. But you go around those ultimately. You work through them and you can keep on going. So think about losing your mate or losing your kids. You are going to keep going, but life just shrinks down to this dark, narrow tunnel. And it's one foot in front of the other as best you can. But to think about losing the Lord, well, the metaphor, the tunnel's just sealed shut with a brick wall. There is no progressing forward. It just stops. What else is there left? Where else can you go? What else can you do? And what point would there be? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I shall not want. He is the only one we can never lose, but only if we value him more than anything else. So as we said, the psalmist uses a very simple analogy of a sheep and its shepherd. Which also shows us the Lord becomes all you want when you simplify your needs and simplify the picture. I can believe that God is what really matters, but then still think that I need good health. I need plenty of money. I need a loving spouse. I need a hassle-free job. And those are things that I have to have those things. And because of that, then my shepherd can't provide for me all that I need. Because I think that I need any number of other things, and if I don't have them, then I'm not going to be whole. So when you watch children grow, the point comes where you have to teach them the difference between a want and a need. And maybe you can remember that feeling that you had as a kid for some toy that you absolutely love. Maybe you can even still name that toy. And there's just that desperate need that you feel. You're dying for it. It physically hurts to not be able to just go to the store and get it, or to go to the store and have to walk by it every time. That parent knows you aren't going to die without it, knows you're going to be just fine, if not better off for doing without in some cases. But the child thinks they've got to have it. And that moreover, their happiness is tied to having that thing. Their fulfillment in life is tied to that. As we grow older, we learn the truth, but I think sometimes we learn that lesson with regard to toys and fun things. But then when what we value are things or people of true significance, it's harder to apply that lesson. So there are things that people want in life, many of them perfectly good. And God isn't necessarily going to give them to us. There may even be people that we want in our life, or that we want to stay in our life. And God will choose differently. And I am never going to be okay with His choices. His choices. If I think I have got to have those things. So think about what the Good Shepherd provides there in Psalm 23. He provides restoration for your soul, guidance for right living, protection from evil, help in facing enemies, His goodness, His mercy, and the hope of living with Him. Those are the things the shepherd promises. And those are true needs. They might not include all of our wants. And I don't mean just trivial ones. Even the substantial ones. It might not include all of those. But it does include what we need. Which merits the question, what do we really need as human beings? There's a special on, you've seen some of those Survivor shows that used to air, and it looks as if somebody's been dropped out in the middle of nowhere, and they've got nothing but the plastic lid from the 20-ounce soda from McDonald's, and they've got to find some way to survive for the week. Never mind the camera crew that's right over there, munching down on whatever provisions they brought. But nevertheless, they're acting as if, okay, this is survival mode. what are the most fundamental things I've got to have. And first and foremost comes water. Food, yes, that's important, but you have got to have water. Have to have that. Or else none of it matters. So what do I truly need as God's created child? I need forgiveness. Or else none of it really matters. I need help in overcoming sin. I need strength to face troubles. I need His teaching and instruction in righteousness so that I can know how to live this life. I need hope of a future with the Lord, or again, else it doesn't matter. I need to be loved by Him. I need to be valued by Him. I would submit to you, those are the truest fundamentals of living. And God promises every one of those to us. But those are the only things that God promises to us. He can give us other things. He usually does. But those are the things that He has promised to give us. He guarantees His people He will provide those things for His sheep. And the reason He guarantees those things to His sheep is because those are the things His sheep truly need. And to become spiritually minded enough to the point that we see that as long as I am forgiven and God helps me to overcome sin against Him and to live righteously before Him, and I get to see heaven one day and the Lord loves me, if we reach the spiritual maturity to where we know if I have those things, then truly that may not be anywhere near what I want, but it is what I need. When we can think that way, then we can say as David did, the Lord is my shepherd and I have what I need. Another thing you see all throughout this poem in verse 2 and verse 3, He leads me. In verse 4, you are with me. In verse 6, I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Lord becomes all that we want when we cherish His presence and our relationship with Him. So all throughout this poem, there's this emphasis on just Him being there. He provides the oil. He provides the overflowing cup. He leads us to still waters and green pastures. The constant bedrock of all of that is the shepherd is with the sheep. But currently now for all of us, that's kind of the challenging part of the relationship, isn't it? Because the Bible says He's always with me. It says He's always there, but I cannot see Him. I cannot touch Him. I cannot hear Him. At least for now. Which makes faith critical. And knowing the story and knowing what God has done and knowing the Gospels and seeing Jesus and what He has done on this earth. That's how I know the voice of the Good Shepherd and know who to follow. I read Him speak and I see what He says. I can know a lot about Him. I can know what He did for people. I can know what He said to people. I can keep those things in my mind and I can understand what God has revealed to me about who He is and how He cares for His creation. I can know who the Father is based on what He has told me about Himself. And I can know enough to trust promises like the ones He makes in Psalm 23. And it's that kind of faith that is at the heart of not being in want. And that kind of love and that kind of relationship as well. Think about somebody that you love so much that the only thing that really matters is you get to be with them. You know, a best friend that you get to see, and when you finally get to see them, you've been waiting for this. Your kids, or perhaps more likely, the grandkids, right? That's what it ultimately becomes all about. The kids, it's nice to have you here, but where are those grandkids? And you don't care what you do, you don't care where you go, you don't care anything like that, you just get to be with them. Or you think of a place that you love going so much, you don't even care what the weather is when you get there, just as long as you get to be there. So extend that familiar feeling and imagine loving the Lord so much that I don't care what I have to do in this life or what it is that life brings. or where it takes me, or how it takes me there, ultimately, just as long as I get to be with the shepherd. And the center of what matters to me is that I am before him and he's watching over me. That's a lot easier to talk about than it is to love. Because all I ultimately need is the Lord, and what he provides can sometimes leave you without a lot of beloved things. But having faith in the Lord like that and loving the Lord like that are quite important. Because as I'm sure many of you can vouch for, there are times when God's presence is the only thing you have that can sustain you. There comes a time in life, perhaps more than once, when everything else fails. Or perhaps everything else is still there, but it can't ultimately do anything about the situation that you're facing. And the Lord is the only thing who can keep you going. Those times are kind of dreadful when you're right in the middle of them, or when you're anticipating them and those days haven't yet come. But perhaps you know that feeling of getting on the other side of that, and realizing that even through that loss and through that sorrow, one thing that it did teach you is this very lesson that we're talking about. Is that ultimately, if I have the Lord as my shepherd, I have the one single true thing that I really do need. And learning that is a blessing. Learning that ultimately, as long as I have God, whatever else gets taken away from me, I wish it wasn't, but it will be okay. Because I have the shepherd. And we know that's what the Bible teaches, but sometimes it takes going through that kind of an experience where you are at rock bottom, shall we say. You have no other options. The only thing left to cling to is God, to learn what it means to cling to God like nothing else compares. So even though my job has failed me, my family has failed me, my friends have betrayed me, even though my possessions have been taken from me, my health has been taken from me, my life is being taken from me, even if I go through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. So even when I go through the darkest valley, the Lord doesn't promise us an easy life free from adversity. But he does promise us here his rod and his staff and his oil and his cup and himself. God says in Isaiah 41 and verse 10 to Israel, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you, or I will hold on to you with my righteous right hand. If I can only get to the point of having enough faith and being spiritually minded enough to be able to genuinely say, as long as the Lord is with me, I do have everything I need. And even in the darkest valley of my life, I can get through it. As hard as it is, and its hardship you couldn't have imagined beforehand, and hurt you couldn't have fathomed beforehand, and frustration that just brings you to your knees. Even if this valley gets as dark can be, such as it could be described as a valley of death, I will not fear, for he is with me. We have a bit of an age range here, so depending upon your life up to this point, some of that may sound rather theoretical. If for you it does, it ain't going to stay that way. At some point, it's going to become quite real. And for those of you for whom those darkest of days is not theoretical in the slightest, you can vouch for the fact that it becomes absolutely the most real thing you ever experience. I don't wish loss on anybody. But I do wish upon you, and I wish God, in a way, would hasten the day when we learn that kind of lesson of He is all that I need, and He is always there. And sometimes it takes having nothing else to help you, but only the shepherd himself to finally teach you that lesson. And learn that lesson. Ultimately, since it teaches you more about your Maker, makes whatever tremendous cost you may have had to pay have worth. You don't have to experience that truth to know that it is true, to know that God is all you need. But if you do know that truth, and you believe that, if the Lord is not your shepherd, but you want Him to be your shepherd, then you need to become a Christian, and you need to be added to the fold. And you need to listen to the voice of the Good Shepherd. When He says, whoever believes in me, whoever is baptized into my blood will be saved. And you need to do that. And you need to seek after the shepherd. And if you will, then God promises that His goodness, His mercy, will follow you all of your days until the end of your days, and you get to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. If we can help you follow the shepherd and be one of His sheep, let us understand this.
There's a line that is drawn by rejecting our Lord.